The woman's fingers were white against the dark wool, clutching the blanket like it held her very soul. Blood had dried beneath her fingernails, and her eyes, those wild, desperate eyes, never left Samuel Morrison's weathered face as he knelt beside her on the barn floor. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind rattling the wooden walls. "Don't open it." But Samuel had already seen too much. The blanket was small, too small, and the way she cradled it spoke of something that made his chest tighten with a familiar ache. The storm had driven her to his doorstep 3 hours before dawn, her horse lathered and trembling, her dress torn and mud-stained. She'd collapsed the moment he'd helped her from the saddle, and she hadn't let go of that bundle since. "Ma'am, you're bleeding," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Whatever's wrong, I can help." She shook her head violently, dark hair whipping across her face. "You don't understand. Nobody can help. Not anymore." Samuel Morrison had been alone on his ranch for 7 years, ever since Martha and little James had been taken by the fever. 7 years of silence, of empty rooms, of mornings that felt like punishment. He'd learned to read the weight of grief in a person's shoulders, the particular way sorrow carved lines around the eyes. This woman carried something heavier than loss, something alive with shame. "I'm not leaving you to bleed out in my barn," he said, reaching for the blanket, her grip tightened. "Samuel Morrison." She spoke his name like a prayer, like a curse. "Yes, I know who you are. I know what you lost. That's why." She closed her eyes, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "That's why I came here. Because you'll understand." The lantern light flickered, casting shadows that danced across her face like ghosts. Outside, thunder rolled across the Colorado plain. And Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach. The way she said his name, the way she looked at him, like she knew him better than a stranger should. "Who are you?" he asked. She opened her eyes, and in them he saw a reflection of his own haunted nights, his own unanswered prayers. "My name is Rebecca Thorne." "And what's in this blanket?" She took a shuddering breath. "It's going to change everything you think you know about your family." Samuel's hand froze inches from the wool. The wind outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Rebecca's words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel's mind raced backward through 7 years of memories, searching for any connection to the name Thorne, finding nothing but shadows and uncertainty. "My family's been dead 7 years, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Not all of them." Rebecca shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at whatever wounds she carried. "Your brother Thomas. He didn't die in that mining accident in Silver Creek." The barn seemed to tilt around Samuel. Thomas, 2 years younger, wild as summer lightning, who'd left home at 17 chasing silver dreams and promises of easy fortune. The telegram had come 6 months later: "Cave in, body never recovered, send what money you can for a proper burial."
That's impossible. He took a new name, started over. Rebecca's free hand pressed against her side, and Samuel saw fresh blood seeping through her fingers. "He became my husband, Thomas Thorne." Samuel's world contracted to the space between heartbeats. Thomas alive, Thomas married. Thomas, where is he now? The question came out harder than he intended, and Rebecca flinched as though he'd struck her. She looked down at the bundle in her arms, and Samuel saw her lips move in what might have been a prayer or a goodbye. Dead. 3 days ago. Her voice was barely a whisper. They came for him in the night. Said he'd stolen from them, cheated them in some card game. I tried to stop them, but... She gestured helplessly at her torn dress, her battered face. Samuel, quote, as his hands clenched into fists. "Who? The Garrett brothers. They run everything from Silver Creek to Denver. Thomas owed them money, more than we had." She looked up at him, and he saw desperation etched in every line of her face. "They would have killed us both, but Thomas, he fought them, gave me time to run." The lantern flame guttered in a draft, throwing wild shadows across the walls. Samuel felt the familiar weight of loss settling on his shoulders, but this time it came with something else. Rage. Thomas had been alive all these years, had found love, had started a family, and now... "The baby," Samuel said, his gaze falling to the blanket. "That's Thomas's child." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming freely now. "Your nephew, born 2 months ago." She pulled the blanket closer to her chest. "But, Samuel, you have to understand. Let me see him. You don't understand what they did. Let me see my brother's son." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd spent years making life-and-death decisions alone, and Rebecca's resistance crumbled. But as her grip loosened on the blanket, she made one last despise. Irrit plea. "Promise me something first. Promise me you won't let them take him." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Who would take him? "The Garretts. They're coming." Rebecca's eyes darted toward the barn doors, as if expecting them to burst open at any moment. "They followed me here. I saw their horses on the ridge when the lightning flashed. They know where I am." Outside, the storm was moving closer, but Samuel could hear something else beneath the thunder. The distant sound of hoofbeats, still miles away but closing steady as death. Why would they want the baby? Rebecca's hands shook as she finally, slowly, began to peel back the edge of the blanket. Because of what Thomas did to them. What he took. The wool fell away, revealing a tiny face, pale and perfect and utterly still. And because of what they did to him. Samuel's heart stopped. The child wasn't breathing, hadn't been breathing for some time from the look of it, but that wasn't what made the air leave his lungs in a rush. It was the mark on the baby's forehead, a brand, still red and angry, burned into the tender skin. The Garrett mark, a twisted G that every rancher from Colorado to Kansas knew and feared. "Jesus Christ," Samuel whispered. "They branded him while he was still alive." Rebecca's voice was hollow, distant. "Made Thomas watch. Said it was payment for what he'd stolen from them. Said every thorn would carry their mark now." Samuel's hands trembled as he reached toward the small, still form. The brand was precise, professional, the kind of mark used on cattle, but burned into human flesh with deliberate cruelty. His nephew, Thomas's son, marked like property and left to die. What did Thomas steal? Nothing. Rebecca's laugh was bitter as winter wind. That's the hell of it. He won nothing in that card game, fair and square, $20,000. But the Garretts don't lose, not ever, so they called him a cheat, and when he wouldn't give back what he'd won, she gestured to the branded child, they took it out in blood. The hoofbeats were closer now, no longer hidden by the storm. Samuel could make out individual horses, at least 6 of them, moving fast despite the rain-soaked ground. He stood, his mind racing through options, all of them bad. How many? 8, maybe 10. Rebecca struggled to her feet, still clutching the dead child. They'll burn this place down if they have to. They'll brand you the same way they branded him. Samuel moved to the barn doors, peering through a gap in the wood. Lightning illuminated the plains, and in that brief white moment he saw them, dark shapes moving across the grassland like wolves on a scent trail. The Garrett brothers and their men, coming to finish what they'd started. "We can't outrun them," he said. "I know." Rebecca's voice was steady now, resolved. "That's why I came here, not to escape them, but to make sure they pay." Samuel turned back to her, and in the lantern light he saw something that chilled him more and the brand, more than the approaching riders. Rebecca Thorne wasn't running anymore, She was waiting. "There's something else you need to know about your brother," Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the sound of approaching thunder, "about why he really left home." Samuel's hands went still on the rifle he had been loading. Outside, the Garrett riders had stopped, their horses stamping and snorting in the rain. They were close enough now that he could hear voices, low and planning. "Tell me." Rebecca laid the dead child on a bed of hay, her movements careful and reverent. When she looked up, Samuel saw a different woman than the one who'd collapsed at his door. This one was dangerous, coiled like a spring. He didn't leave to find silver. He left because he killed a man. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. Thomas, barely 17, wild but never cruel, never violent except in defense of something smaller than himself. Who? Jacob Garrett, the youngest brother. Rebecca's smile was sharp as broken glass. Self-defense, but you know how the law works when it comes to Garretts. Thomas ran rather than hang, and you all believed he was dead because that's what he needed you to believe. Outside, a voice called out, "Rebecca Thorne, we know you're in there. Send out the boy and maybe we'll make this quick." Samuel's world tilted again. The boy, they thought the child was still alive. They don't know, he whispered. No, they think I'm hiding him, protecting him. Rebecca moved to the shadows beside the door, and Samuel saw she was holding something, a small derringer, nickel-plated and deadly at close range. That's our advantage. Our advantage for what? Justice. She met his eyes across the lamplight. Thomas spent 6 years planning this. Every card game, every dollar won, every move calculated to bring the Garretts close enough to hurt them the way I'd hurt others. He knew they'd come for him eventually. He wanted them too. Another voice from outside. 5 minutes, Mrs. Thorne. Then we start burning. Samuel's mind raced through the implications. Thomas alive all these years, planning revenge. The card game not luck, but setup. The $20,000 not a prize, but bait to draw the Garretts into a trap they couldn't resist. The money, he said. Where is it? Rebecca pointed to the dead child, and Samuel's stomach lurched before he understood. Not on the child, in the child. The blanket, hidden in the wool, sewn into the fabric with careful precision. Every dollar, plus interest they have stolen from a dozen other families over the years. Rebecca's voice was steady, determined. Thomas died getting it, but he made sure I could finish what he started. By doing what? By giving them what they came for. She looked down at the small, still form wrapped in $20,000, and taking everything they have in return. Thunder crashed overhead, and in that moment Samuel understood. The dead child wasn't just Thomas's son. He was the key to everything. The bait in a trap 7 years in the making. Samuel opened the barn doors as dawn broke gray and cold across the Colorado plains. 8 men sat their horses in the mud, rain dripping from hat brims and rifle barrels. At their head, Marcus Garrett looked exactly like what he was, a man who had built an empire on other people's fear. Where's the boy? Garrett's voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been told no. Right here. Samuel stepped aside, letting them see Rebecca standing in the lamplight. The blanket-wrapped bundle in her arms. Garrett smiled, but his eyes stayed hard as winter stone. Smart woman. Knows when she's beaten. He gestured to his men. Take the child. Kill them both. But Rebecca didn't move, didn't flinch as 4 rifles swung toward her. Instead, she began to unwrap the blanket, slowly deliver ours. Telly. Funny thing about your family, Mark, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Once you brand something, it belongs to you. Isn't that right, Mr. Garrett? The blanket fell away, revealing the small, still form, and the angry red G burned into his forehead. Several of the riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Even hard men had limits. You branded a baby. Samuel's voice was quiet, conversational. 2 months old. Cost of doing business, Garrett said, but something flickered in his eyes. The father was a thief. No. Rebecca's laugh was soft, almost gentle. The father was a planner, and you just confessed to murder in front of witnesses. That's when Samuel saw them, figures emerging from the morning mist, surrounding the ranch house. Men with badges, with rifles, with grim faces and legal authority. Sheriff Morrison from Silver Creek, his deputies, 2 federal marshals who'd been tracking the Garrett gang for months. Thomas sent letters, Rebecca said, still holding her dead son. Dozens of them, to every law office from here to Denver. Evidence of every crime, every theft, every murder you've committed. Posted the day before he died, along with instructions to meet us here. Garrett's horse reared as he spun, seeing the trap closing around him. You can't prove anything. We can prove you branded a baby, one of the marshals called out. That's enough. The next moments passed like images from a fever dream. Garrett reaching for his gun. Samuel diving toward Rebecca. Rifles firing from all directions. Horses screaming and men falling, and the smell of gunpowder thick in the morning air. When the shooting stopped, Marcus Garrett lay face down in the mud, the rain washing his blood toward a drainage ditch. 3 of his men were dead, the others wounded and surrendering. Samuel found himself on his knees beside Rebecca, both of them somehow untouched by the violence. She was still holding her son, but something had changed in her face. The desperate grief was still there, but underneath it, Samuel saw something else. Peace. It's over, she whispered. The federal marshal approached them carefully, his badge bright against his dark coat. Mrs. Thorne, we'll need your testimony. Rebecca nodded, then looked up at Samuel. What Thomas stole, it wasn't just money, it was hope. For families like ours, like yours, a chance to live without fear. She placed the dead child in Samuel's arms, and he felt the weight of $20,000 sewn into the blanket, the weight of justice served and debts paid in full. His name was James, she said softly, after your son. Samuel Morrison stood in the doorway of his barn, holding his brother's child as the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the Colorado plains where the Garrett Empire had finally come to an end.